Picture this: a quiet neighborhood street, an early morning sun, and a man walking along with a trash grabber in hand, doing his part to keep the area clean. Seems ordinary, right? But in an unexpected twist, flashing police lights break the calm. Officers approach him, questioning his intentions. Why was he there? What was he doing? The man tries to explain, just a neighbor picking up trash. Yet, suspicion hangs heavy. What happened next took this encounter from awkward to outrageous. The officers, still unconvinced, insisted the man continue cleaning, supervising his every move. Neighbors looked on, confused and uneasy. Some even recorded the moment, unable to believe what was unfolding. Little did anyone know, this wasn't just any man. His name, his face. They were about to send shockwaves through the very city those officers were sworn to serve. It wasn't until the truth unraveled that the story took an extraordinary turn. The man they had stopped wasn't just another resident. In fact, he wasn't even an average citizen. He was someone with the power to change lives, policies, and even the futures of those same officers. That's when the world learned the shocking truth about who he really was. And the fallout was nothing short of jaw-dropping. Stay tuned, because this story is only getting started. As the man continued picking up trash under the watchful eyes of the officers, he stayed calm. He answered their questions politely, despite the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Passers-by whispered to each other, trying to piece together what was happening. Why were the police so fixated on him? He wasn't causing trouble, just cleaning the street. But it was clear. They didn't believe he belonged there. The officers didn't recognize him, but he recognized them. He'd lived in that area for months, quietly observing, learning, and preparing for the role he was about to step into. This wasn't just any neighborhood to him, it was his community. And the people watching this humiliating scene, they were the ones he wanted to serve, to protect, to uplift. One officer muttered something about protocol, while another tapped away on a computer in their patrol car. They were still running his information, trying to figure out who he was. It was almost surreal. They had no idea they were talking to someone whose name would soon be in headlines, whose decisions could impact their own lives. Meanwhile, the man kept cleaning, his mind racing. He could end this ordeal with a single sentence, but instead he chose to wait. What would happen if they found out on their own? How would they react? And most importantly, what would this mean for the community watching so closely? As the officers continued their questioning, one of them stepped away to take a call. The other stayed behind, arms crossed, watching the man with skepticism. "So you live here, huh?" the officer asked, his tone laced with doubt. The man nodded calmly, explaining again that he was simply cleaning up trash outside his own neighborhood. But his answers weren't enough to ease the officer's suspicion. The crowd around them had grown, with more neighbors gathering at a distance. Some whispered about how ridiculous the situation was. Others nervously filmed from their phones, unsure of how this would end. Among them was an older woman who recognized the man, but stayed quiet, unsure if stepping in would make things worse. In the meantime, the officer in the car looked up from his screen, his face shifting as he read the information that had just popped up. He walked back to his partner, pulling him aside. Their whispered conversation was tense, and they kept glancing back at the man, whose calm demeanor hadn't wavered. Back in the crowd, whispers began to spread. "Wait, isn't that?" someone murmured, but the thought was drowned out by the tension of the moment. The man could sense the shift, but he still didn't say a word. He simply waited, letting the officers and the crowd unravel the truth on their own. What would they do once they realized the man they'd stopped wasn't just another neighbor? That he wasn't just picking up trash, but carrying a weight of responsibility far greater than anyone there could imagine? The answer was coming, but not before the tension hit its peak. The officers exchanged looks, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm. One of them turned back to the man, his tone now edged with hesitation. "Can you stay here for a moment?" he asked, his voice no longer carrying the same authority as before. The man gave a small nod, his calm presence almost unnerving in contrast to the growing tension. The crowd had grown even larger by now, their murmurs growing louder. People were beginning to connect the dots, and a ripple of recognition swept through the onlookers. "Is that?" someone whispered, pointing toward the man. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking why the police were talking to someone so important. But still, no one dared to approach. The older woman in the crowd stepped forward, clutching her purse tightly. She hesitated, her eyes darting between the officers and the man. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "I know who he is," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd grew silent, all eyes on her. The officers froze, their earlier confidence crumbling as they exchanged uncertain glances. One officer finally mustered the courage to ask, "Who is he, ma'am?" The woman hesitated again, clearly weighing her words. "You'll find out soon enough," she replied cryptically, a hint of defiance in her tone. The man gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if thanking her for not saying too much. Just then, another police car pulled up, its siren briefly wailing before falling silent. A senior officer stepped out, his expression unreadable. He approached the scene, taking in the crowd, the tense officers, and the man at the center of it all. The senior officer's face stiffened as recognition dawned. "Stand down," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The junior officers looked at him confused. "But sir," one began, only to be cut off. "Do you have any idea who this is?" the senior officer asked, his voice low but heavy with authority. The crowd leaned in, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The man finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Let them figure it out," he said, gesturing toward the laptop in the patrol car. "It's all there." One of the officers hesitated, then hurried back to the car. Moments later, the screen's glow illuminated his face as he scrolled through the results. His eyes widened, and he quickly turned to his partner, whispering something urgent. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. What had they found? And why was the senior officer treating this man with such respect? But before anyone could piece it all together, the man stepped forward, his posture straight, his presence commanding. The quiet street felt like it was holding its breath. Something bigger than anyone had imagined was about to unfold. The officer at the car finally stepped out, his face pale, and handed a piece of paper to the senior officer. The senior officer scanned it quickly, then turned to the man. His demeanor shifted completely. Gone was the tension, replaced by an air of apology and respect. He nodded at the man and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "allow me to introduce someone you'll all be hearing much more about. This is your newly elected governor." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People exchanged stunned looks, some audibly saying, "Wait, what?" Others turned their phones toward the man, filming him as the realization set in. The man, standing tall with quiet dignity, met their astonished gazes. The junior officers froze, their earlier authority evaporating in an instant. One stammered, "Gee, Governor." "Him?" Their disbelief mirrored that of the onlookers. The man finally broke his silence, his voice calm yet piercing. "Yes, me," he said. "The same man you assumed didn't belong here. The same man you forced to clean up trash in his own neighborhood. And the same man who now holds the power to change how situations like this are handled, for good." The crowd erupted into murmurs, the officers clearly uncomfortable. But just as the tension seemed to break, the man turned toward the older woman in the crowd. "And thank you," he said, his voice softer now, "for speaking up when it mattered." As the officers awkwardly stepped back, the senior officer cleared his throat. "On behalf of the department, I apologize for this misunderstanding." The man tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "A misunderstanding is one way to put it," he replied. Then, looking back at the crowd, he added, "This moment isn't about me, it's about us. About how we treat each other, no matter what we look like or where we come from." As the crowd cheered, one final twist came. The man pulled out a small notebook from his pocket. "I've been taking notes for months," he said, holding it up. "Every encounter, every story from neighbors, every struggle. This is what I'll use to make real change." With that, he walked away, leaving the crowd and officers stunned. The man who had quietly picked up trash moments ago had left them with something far more powerful, a reminder that leadership can come from the most unexpected places. As the man walked away, the street slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy in the air lingered.